Hi, welcome to NDE TV. I'm Peggy Robinson. Today's guest is Kelly Sammy, and she's going to tell us about her near-death experience. Hi, Kelly.
Hi, Peggy. Thanks for having me. I'm really honored to be here with you.
Well, thank you. So start wherever you like and take as long as you like.
Thank you. I will. I will. Wow, this is exciting. So, I had an NDE in 2008, and mine's a little bit different in that my NDE is by my own hand. I committed suicide during a very tumultuous time in my life. And I will say and preface this throughout the video. Um, I lived with depression and anxiety pretty much my whole entire life. And I think most of us can relate some level, whether it's just experientially in little dabbles through our lives where we have some type of depression or anxiety. But for me, it was prevalent throughout the whole 38 years of my life. Um, and I speak a lot about that in my own sharings about what I called a plan D. And I'll talk a little bit about that because it leads up to what happens. Um, Plan D for me in my head, although I didn't call it that at the time, was no matter what was going on in life, I felt like it was happening to me, not for me. And in that experience, anything that felt heavy or hard or like too much, in the back of my mind, there was always this plan D. If this doesn't work, I can always kill myself, which I now know is very irrational. But growing up and living with a chaotic family and having lots of really, uncomfortable experiences in my childhood, I won't go too much into detail on that. It'll get covered a little bit in my NDE Act itself. I always leaned on that and didn't realize that wasn't a rational thinking. That was a diseased mind. So for 38 years, I was really good at hiding my depression and anxiety. I wasn't your person that they stereotype that stayed in bed all day or looked depressed. I actually was the opposite. I was very high functioning. I kept a smile on my face. I did all of the life things, but I was really, really, really sad and depressed and anxious inside. And I carried that with me. And no matter what was happening, again, I felt like it was happening to me, not for me. So, experiences such as being molested at the age of 3, having 2 alcoholic parents, going through really tumultuous, ugly divorce, having both of my parents then kind of take off and recreate their lives and leave me to figure it out at age of 13, 14. Started working as a young child in school still to survive, and just lots of things always felt like they were happening to me. This built up over 38 years of my life. 38 years of feeling like a victim of life. Why am I here? That was the question that always ran through my head. Lucky for me, I had really supportive grandparents on my father's side, and I was able to escape summers and be with them and get some really strong morals and foundations underneath me that grounded me to get me through the 38 years. My parents both loved us the best that they could with the tools that they had, but they were alcoholics and they were dysfunctional in their own rights. So that carried forward with my plan D. No matter what was going on, there was always this background noise that if this doesn't work, just kill myself. Totally irrational, diseased mind. That leads to me having my own child and going through my own very tumultuous divorce. My ex-husband had an affair and my child was a baby, and it was a very, very rough time. So we picked up and we moved. We went to another country. Sounds crazy, but that was the life I lived at the time, where I thought flee, escape, start over, and avoid. And if it doesn't work, plan D is always there. So we went to my ex-husband's country, New Zealand. And we did that because him and I discussed after the divorce where would be a great place for me to raise our son, who was very tiny at the time, just under 2 years, 14 months. That would be safe for a single mom to raise a child on her own, and New Zealand was the place. So off we went. The first few years there were really beautiful. We discovered ourselves. We, made new friends, new career. Son was thriving. Everything seemed to be going quite well. But I was still very, very depressed, going through the divorce, having to have a full hysterectomy, going through hormonal changes, just so many things. It was like, that was my life though. People would say, oh my gosh, I feel like you walk around with a black cloud over you. And that's how it felt. So I ended up meeting and falling in love with another American in New Zealand. We were working at Habitat for Humanity and we connected there. And that really lifted my life for quite a few years. Plan D seemed to go away for a while, but as with depression and anxiety, it came back and it was stronger than ever. And at this stage, my partner and I both said, this isn't rational. I was finally in a healthy enough relationship to share with him that Plan D and what was going on, and that I would put everybody to bed. I would get through the day with a smile on my face, and I would get in the shower when I knew everyone was sleeping, and I would sit on the shower floor and I would cry. And no one knew this was going on, but I finally had to share with him because I couldn't hide it anymore. So I got in to see a doctor and they immediately put me on antidepressants. And I had no idea how sensitive I was to medications because I was never a drinker, never a drug user. And as they put me on these medications, the doctor said, it may take a while for us to find the right combination to get you in a good place. So I trusted him and I just kept working with him. But week after week, I was getting more anxious and more depressed. And I brought that forward and I explained to him that that was what was going on. And rather than take me off, the dose just kept getting changed. At this stage, Plan D was fully back alive. And not only was it alive, but the ideation of suicide was so impactful that it was a common thought throughout my day. But I wasn't telling anyone but the doctor this. And several things happened. Again, very normal life stuff, but I felt like it was happening to me, not for me. It just clicked one day. This is the straw on the camel's back. And I started planning. And I started planning my suicide. I started collecting medications, like many houses at the time. We had lots of pill bottles in the house from broken arms and legs and this and that. And so I just took all of the bottles and I threw them all together. I didn't know what I had. It was a mix of so many things. And not being a drug user, I didn't realize throwing in the antidepressants, the anti-anxiety, the sleep meds, all of it together was such a dangerous cocktail, but it was. And I built the illusion in my head through being so diseased in the mind that my family would be better off without me. And this is something that I will say over and over again. If anyone is watching this that's experiencing suicide ideation or has a loved one that is, please know this is not something we reach for willfully. It's something that is an effect and effect of a diseased mind. And we need help when we're going through this, not told that we're selfish, all those things that people say around suicide.
Or how could you as a mother? I think that was the hardest thing someone said to me after the fact.
Yeah, it's like you just need to be compassionate, even if you don't experience it or you've had it, but it was so minimal for you. We're all unique in this. We're all snowflakes, and how we experience and how our brains experience things are very different. So I salvaged all of these medications and planned things out and did the research that I had to take the pills slowly, et cetera, et cetera. And again, this is a pure fact, knowing that this is how diseased the mind was. I woke up that one day, beautiful day, and I said, today's the day. And there was no rationale for that. It was a gorgeous day. Got up and I thought, again, very irrational, I want to take photos of my family. I want them to have these as memories when I'm gone. Now, look at that in hindsight and think, why would they ever want those photos? But in that moment,
Makes sense, doesn't it?
yeah, it's crazy. So I got up and I said, guys, it's a gorgeous day. Let's get outside. Let's take some photos. And my partner knew that I had to go on the mainland. We lived on a really tiny island in the middle of New Zealand that you could only get to by ferry. And I said, I have to go on the mainland for an appointment. So let's take some photos before I go. So, we all got dressed and we went outside and we took beautiful photos. Our house sat right on the beach and we had the beach in the background, beautiful sunshine, everyone smiling and happy. And inside, I'm thinking, this is wonderful. This is how I get to remember them. This is how they get to remember me. Again, very diseased, very not rational thinking.
It makes you wonder where those lies come from,
I'll talk a little bit about that because that's the work I do now on the other side of it. I finally figured it out, and that's the work I do to help people not ever go there. So, great question, too. Yeah, that was, I never asked that when I was in my depression, but now I ask it every moment when those thoughts arise. So, the photos were taken, and off I went. The family thought that I was headed to do this event with my doctor and off the island. But in my knowing, I had it all planned. I got my favorite pillow, my book, and I had started pre-writing suicide notes, the longer ones. I had them hidden, and I had a notepad. I had all the pills, and off I went. I got in my car, which was an SUV, and I drove off. And I didn't have a spot picked. We lived again on a very remote island, and I knew there were spaces where you could drive up into the crevices towards the top of some of the mountainous areas, and we're building homes up there. And I figured it was cleared, and so I drove up that way. I found one of those clearing spots, parked my SUV, and it was overlooking this gorgeous bluff of ocean. And I slowly sat there. I had gotten gin and tonics. I didn't mention that, but I wasn't a drinker, as I mentioned previously. And I knew that if I mixed the alcohol with the pills and I did it very slowly, that my body would then slowly come down with that. So I sat there and I finished some of the suicide notes as I slowly was taking the pills and drinking the alcohol, looking at the view, and just really being in the moment. And what I recall of that was just, again, very clearly, this is the right thing for my family. They're better off without me. And the diseased mind just kept playing that. I was raised Catholic, so this was considered sinful. And I just kept saying, I know there's a loving and merciful God. Regardless of what happens here, I trust something in my heart that tells me I'll be okay. They'll be okay. And I just kept playing that. Now, again, I probably was rationalizing what I was getting ready to do. But I also now understand in my NDE that that was coming from a higher place. So I was being guided in all of this without realizing it, of course, hindsight being 2020. Continued to do the medications and the drinking and the suicide notes. And I started to feel them kicking in. And the last note that I needed to write was to the person that I knew would find my body. And that was really important to me because I didn't want that for anyone. It really made me feel yucky to think that someone was going to have to discover my body, notify my family, and all of that. So the very last note that I put on the top of my dashboard was to that person, apologizing, explaining to them that I hated that they had to do this for a living and that I'm so sorry and please forgive me for that. I decided that I needed a little bio trip before this really set in. So I opened the door thinking I could go find a little spot to go to the restroom. and immediately realized my legs were no longer there. I was like walking on noodles. And I thought, that's not going to happen. So I closed the door, threw the pillow and the blanket and all of the things that were important to me in the back, put the suicide notes on the dashboard, and I climbed in the back of my SUV and laid down. As I laid there and stared at the ceiling of my SUV, I just kept listening for my breath, because we don't know what dying means, right? I mean, it's not a normal thing to know what to expect. I just thought, how will I know when I'm dead? Which again seems so irrational, but I just kept thinking, when the breath stops. So I just kept tuning into my body and saying, are you still breathing? Are you still breathing? And that became like an inner mantra, which I now realize was a form of meditation. I didn't know it at the time. And I just kept repeating that over and over. Am I still breathing? And I would listen. Okay, there's the breath. But as I was doing this and I was saying to God, I know there's a merciful God. Whatever happens here, I know that I will be met with love. Again, not realizing how divinely protected I was in that moment. And I just kept following the breath. And I noticed it getting shallower and shallower. I started feeling tingling in my body, which I thought was the medication and the alcohol. And then I started hearing, which it's so hard. And I'm sure you hear this on your channel all the time. And I'm sure you've said this a million times yourself, putting into words what the body experiences, but I'll do my best. I started feeling these sensations like I wasn't the body, but I didn't, again, attribute it to understanding what was happening. I just felt like this must be what it feels like to die. But I wasn't having pain and I wasn't experiencing fear. I just was really focused on the breath and these sensations. And then I heard these crackling, popping sounds, but they weren't outside of me. I was them. They were not an inner ear or an inner hearing. You'll hear me talk about this, like all the sensations we attribute to seeing and hearing are through these things on our body. It wasn't that, it was an internal knowingness that I was the sound. I was the sensation of crackling and popping. And that continued, and it got louder and louder, and I was becoming it. It was like my whole body was booming and vibrating. And then I felt this pulling sensation. It was the strongest pull I've ever felt in my life, like something was lifting me. And all of a sudden, whoosh, I was out of my body, above my SUV, looking as though there was no rooftop on my SUV, down on my physical body underneath, which was moving and obviously very uncomfortable, very unstable, appeared to be in pain, but I wasn't having any of those sensations or feelings. And interestingly enough, there was no desire to get back in there. There was no fear for that thing that was in the car. There was no remorse or regret. There was no, oh my gosh, what have I done? There was just a peaceful, calm knowingness that everything was okay and just to trust it. And while this was all going on, I wasn't even recognizing what I had become, which was bodiless. I wasn't curious. There weren't thoughts happening about any of it. It was just a witness to it all, like these eyes, but no one having them, watching this whole thing from above. I, again, will never be able to attribute how much time each of these kind of segments seem to last, because time and space is pure illusion. I now know this. And our linear 3D self needs that to have structure here. But once we exit the body, that just dissipates. So I have no idea how long I apparently hovered, if you will, in a no body state watching this. But with no regret and no remorse, it seemed uninterested after a bit of time. And there was another sensation or a pulling, the popping and crackling again began, and just this freedom, like I was expanding. And again, a pull, strong, strong pull. I only can attribute it to upwards, but I now know there is no up or down. It was just a complete enraptured going in every direction as energy. And that's what was happening. It felt like I had come out of a tuna can and my energy just wanted to expand into everything. And that everythingness was cracking and popping and sensations were pulling. And I became all of it, up, 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 if you will. And all of a sudden there was like this burst into what I call the abyss or darkness. That may sound scary. It was the most loving, most pleasing sensation I've ever experienced. Pure bliss, pure love. I now know that was awareness. I became part of that everythingness. We call it God. As soon as we label it, it becomes a separate entity. So I don't like to give labels to things, but in sharing, of course, we have to. So whatever you refer to this as, source energy, love, God. For me, I refer to it as God, but not a being, an energy. And I was part of that again. There was an awareness of this, like I was home. I wasn't afraid. It was normal. It felt so peaceful. And I would have happily just hovered as everything, expanding, like the energy was just going in every direction. There was no more popping. There was no more pulling. There was just, the only thing I can ascribe it to was what I would think of as floating. But I wasn't an energy separate to float. I was just all of it. So again, I don't know how long this segment lasted. I now know all these years later, I'm still getting downloads from my time in that abyss, or that void, or that nothingness, or God, whatever you call it. And all of a sudden, I just knew there was a knowingness, there was something else ahead, if you will. And I felt again more opening, expansion, boundless aliveness, a pulling sensation, more cracking, and an upward draw. And again, more expansion. All of a sudden, I was getting these, oh my gosh, these smells. I can't even, oh, wish I could find them here. I know you relate, Peggy, and I know other NDEers relate. The closest thing I can say was gardenias or jasmines, like these floral smells.
I never had smells.
You didn't have smells?
Yeah.
Interesting. I love that we all have such unique experiences. I think that's fascinating. But it wasn't, again, a smelling like we think of with our senses. I was the smell. I was hearing this glorious, angelic sounds. I call it music, but it wasn't music. I was the tones. And I just, again, felt so safe. And there was this pink, this hue of pink. I try to recreate it with watercolors and such, but again, there's just no recreating what our linear brains see here, which is so limited. And I just felt yet another extension of bliss and peacefulness. I felt held in the grace of God, but beyond God, I felt like I was in a community energy, like I was part of something now, where in the abyss, I was all of it. Now this felt like not separation like we have in the 3D, but almost like there could be other experiences or other aspects of things. I now refer to this as heaven. But again, I don't like giving labels, but for the benefit of the listeners, it's something I think everyone can relate to. That heaven experience where we don't have to necessarily be oneness, but we can collaborate and experience other things, but very different than the linear. No need for a body still, although you can have that. No need to show up as an entity or an energy, but you can have that. And when I say you can have that, what I mean is I recognized thoughts seemed to be back, but they were very different than what we think of as thoughts. There was some ability to be taking in the pinkness and the sounds and the smells, but I was them, but I was also able to recognize I was them. It's, again, very hard to articulate in words. I just knew, again, in this segment of time and space, that there was something calling to me, that there was something that wanted my attention. And what I was now realizing was, unlike in the physical body, if you want to go somewhere and you're not a body, just the thought of you're being summoned brings you there. There's no need to fly or, move or anything like that. It's just thought, for lack of words, or intention, and that is the space where you are. And that's what happened.
That's our travel.
Yeah. And I didn't recognize or know why, but in my experience, I just knew, again, possibly because I was Catholic and I was always drawn to the magical parts of Catholicism, like, Mary and all of the apparitions of Mary and Padre Pio and all of the archangels. That was what kept me thriving as a young girl in Catholicism. So in this experience, I just knew it was Archangel Gabriel. And I didn't know why. I just knew I was being summoned and to follow that energy of summon. And I did have the experience of visually seeing this Archangel Gabriel. And just the sensation of this, come, come. No words, all telepathic, no need for words. It was all just known. And again, not a having to come, just by the invitation or the intention, there we were. The next recognition in my now understanding of that experience was we were in what I refer to as a tomb. It was so incredible, and it felt like a kingdom, like it was very powerful, and a place that in this heaven space, I almost felt like I wasn't worthy of, which I know now in the abyss, I wouldn't have felt that unworthiness. So again, in heaven, there seems to be some of our, not human element, but our recognition of independence or community or separation, even though we're not that. And so this unworthiness, for lack of a better word, felt like, why am I of all being led here, And this space was magnificent. It was almost like a marble stone structure, very magical feeling. And this is where I would say I had what many refer to as your preview of life. For me, it was different than a lot of other NDEers. I didn't have this lengthy, it didn't feel lengthy at all. It felt like seconds of my 38 years. I re-experienced everything. And each of the experiences, remember I mentioned that I felt like life was happening to me, and it was a very victim-y kind of perspective of how I perceived my life. It wasn't that. It was like everything was celebrated, the good, the bad, the right, the wrong, the sinful, the angelic. It was like the energies or entities that were in that space with me, which at this time I wasn't seeing anyone. I just could feel this enormity of ancestral energy and angelic energy and light being energy. And I just knew they were there without seeing them. I wasn't a body, but I was having what appeared to be somewhat of a separate experience of all of this, and witnessing my whole 38 years. And every single thing was celebrated. Every segment was, you did it. Oh my gosh, you did it. And it was so loving, supportive. And this is where I was infused, is how I refer to it, or I was given a download to bring back of what soul plans are. And that came back with me, and that all of this was predetermined, and I was part of that discussion of my soul plan. None of this was happening to me, it was happening for me. And I was part of those engagements. And I mentioned some of the experience that I had, like my maternal grandfather molested me when I was 3 years old, and he was on the other side now. And I had the experience of getting to re-experience that with him, but in a different form, in a form of, this was a loving encounter that we created together. And in the linear and in the 3D human, it was horrific. But just understand, you're not that body. This never happened to you. You are like a movie on a screen and having experiences as God, moving in a physicality, so you can know all of this, good, bad, right, and wrong, all the things we call duality being expressed. But as I mentioned, it was like seconds of my 38-year life. And I was able to thank him and hug him and love him and see his pureness and his unconditional love that he brought to me as part of my soul family, at the most loving sense that he would have agreed to do that, and bring that forward and be able to have a 365 per view and come back and say, we did that. Oh my gosh, crazy that set the tone of your whole life, you know? And I know that's hard for many who watch my NDE and they say, oh my gosh, that's awful. And I share it on purpose. I share it on purpose because I think it's important. Those of us who share our NDEs, we're here for a reason, to remind us to remember that we get so caught in the concepts and the beliefs and the conditioning that we have in a linear form, that perhaps is worthwhile shedding, looking at differently, and perhaps opening our hearts to the awareness that we are, so that that doesn't have to be the life that we live. And that's why most of us come forward with just pure unconditional love of wanting that for others. Talk a little bit more about that when we wrap up. But I had so many beautiful experiences. I would not be able to cover all of them. And what's fascinating to me is all these years later, I'm still getting downloads of things that happened. Again, because we're in linear, we think that time and space is real. And so a then and a now is our reference points. But the reality is it's all happening now. And so all these paradigms and aspects are overlapping. We call it reincarnation, or we say we have many lives. But what I was shown is every time we take a breath and we take a new one, that is a death and a rebirth. And so that is reincarnation. And this human element seems to store an idea of what life is. We call it yesterday and tomorrow. But the reality is, we don't know that any of that's true. It's all built on a foundation of thought. And when you start to look at the thoughts and all of the beliefs in the linear laws of the universe start to fall away, which I love doing that work. That's what I do, is help people see that you don't have to die to get there. What starts to happen is the recognition that we are that unconditional love, even when we're in the physicality. We have been gifted that in our physical form. We've just forgotten it from the moment we were born, when conditioning started with, you are a girl, your name will be Kelly. Immediately, every I am thought takes me a step further from God. So it's unraveling all that to get closer back to God, which I am and always have been, as have you. So many of these experiences that I had with those on the other side are still coming. We call it downloads, but the reality is it's happening right now with all of these aspects of Kelly, all of these variances that I seem to be having. We refer to it as free will. I was shown that just isn't the case. My soul plan has it all mapped out. I'm part of that soul plan as God, as this oneness, and nothing is ever happening to me. It's all happening for me. And when I move from my heart center and I meet every person as God, it is the most humble way to live, because unconditional love is all that can come and that can flow from this center of this beingness that we call a human entity, which I've never been. I now refer to myself as the story of Kelly because I recognize I am not this. I'm the one looking through these lenses, apparently, and having the experience as God, getting to know what it's like to have a body, getting to know what it's like to have duality without the experience of, being all of this. How would I know what it feels like to hug a person, right? Think of a mirror. How can a mirror know itself? If God is a mirror of all of this, how can it experience itself unless it breaks into fragments and has many to engage with? And that's what the incarnation is and what I was shown. In this life review, I just had an intuitive knowingness that they were preparing me to not remain here. At the time when I returned to my body, which I'll talk more about, I didn't realize that I was completely okay with this. But what I now know is there was actually resistance and I didn't know it. And I did have a little bit of a tantrum and did want to stay, but my son at the time was very young when this happened. And yet I heard this male voice and it said, "Mom, I need you to come back. I need you." And it was a male. And I saw this physicality walking towards my no body energy. And I recognized the eyes. And it was my son at the age of 21. How I knew he was 21, I don't know. I just intuitively knew. And he said, "I need you to come back. I need you." And again, he was very little at the time, 6, 7 years old. And I knew I had to go back. I knew he needed me, and I knew he needed me to be in the body. So as, again, this knowingness that the resuming to the body was going to take effect, I again knew that the archangels and the light beings and all of the energies there were leading me and guiding me. Again, no body, just a floating sensation through this bliss, these smells, these sounds, this love, this presence, this peace. And I was gifted with the most beautiful thing from the angels, which said to me, not in words, in telepathy, "Your only role is to breathe and not resist. The rest is taken care of." Now, I didn't understand how profound that was. And I also didn't understand at the time they were saying, "And we always see you." I didn't hear that at the time. That came later. And the next thing I knew, the crackling, the popping, the sensations, the pulling down now, for lack of better terms, feeling like the body was now having to somehow reformulate itself, and this boundless energy was having to come back together. A pause in that abyss again, no idea how long, also no idea how many downloads I was gifted with in that space. I now know it was 18 minutes apparently by the time they found me. I'll talk about that in a minute, but about 18 minutes that they had found me and were working on me and getting me loaded into a helicopter. Was dead. I was dead. It was not a near-death experience. I was dead, and they had to bring me back.
Did someone come along and see you in the back seat of the car?
What happened was where I was parked was on a clearing, like I mentioned, where they were building, and it was a Saturday, and no coincidences, of course, one of the construction workers on his day off went to see if they had cleared the spot for the week ahead so he could plan for the workers, and saw my car there. And he was ready to call it in as an abandoned car because there was no reason for my car to be there. And then he thought, maybe some kids had come up there to party. And so he was checking it out. And that's when he saw me in the back. That's when the ambulance was called. They had to bring in a helicopter. They had to bring me down and airlift me. But as I was coming back into the physicality of the body, um, there was just this sensation of being squished back into a can. The energy of not having that boundless aliveness, and yet I still felt like vibration. I just felt like molecules and atoms. I didn't feel like this body yet. And I felt a sense of euphoria like I've never felt in my life. Just so absolutely alive and wanting everyone to know how beautiful this life is and not to take any of it for granted. And they're trying to work on me, cutting my clothes off. I could see that I had actually gotten sick, so they couldn't pump my stomach and had digested, and the capsules were empty. So they were hearing them, radio ahead to the hospital and make all the plans. And I'd never been in a helicopter, and my arms are doing this. And of course, they're thinking, here's a suicidal lady. She's fighting us. But I'm trying to tell them, I'm okay. I'm alive. Oh my God, and they probably think I've damaged my brain and who knows what was going on. But they thought I was resisting. So they're all trying to structure me and hold me down to get the tubes in and the oxygen on and all that stuff, cut my clothes off and radio ahead. And I'm just in pure euphoria. I'm just bliss. All I could feel was love. I felt like it was just an energy of love that could not be contained in this body. It felt really uncomfortable to have all that contained. Like if you've ever felt restless leg syndrome, where your legs just feel like they move, it was all over the body. Every earlobes, my nose, my lips, everything just were like trying to bust out of the skin. And just this love that just could not be contained. I probably looked like a silly drunk idiot laying there, yeah, land. Nothing had started rationalizing for me yet about thoughts like, what did you just do? What did you just experience? None of that was going on. I just wanted to express love. I just felt the need to express love. So since I couldn't do it through words, I just became this ball of love that I was just exuding this love. I felt like the whole island was just beaming with this love that wanted to come out of me. And I'm being airlifted. We get to the hospital and they bring me in the ER. And I'm taken into a little suicide watch room right by the front desk with the nurses station. And just like any ER in New Zealand, very similar, there's cots and beds all around you and you're very closely watched. And that's what was happening. They were pulling blood to check if I had damaged my liver and my organs and all the things that you do in these situations. But it was way too far beyond them pumping my stomach. Thank goodness, because I had never heard how horrific that was. I was literally blessed to not have to go through that. They could not believe when they ran the toxicology that my organs were fine. When I had to give a urine sample, I could smell floral smells coming out of my body. So many just beautiful signs. And yet I hadn't started to rationalize any of this yet. I think when the medication was really starting to come down and I had to lay there and just wait for them to keep coming in and rotationally checking on me, I just laid there. And I think that's when it started to dawn on me what had happened. And I was just molecules and atoms in my mind. I wasn't this body still, even though I could see it and feel it. It felt very dense. My legs and arms felt very loopy. And the nurses just kept saying, when the drugs wear off, hopefully you'll start to have all of your neuropathy will kick in and your body will start to move normally again. But I wasn't telling them if I stared at the wall, I became it. I became the atoms of the wall and I was moving and I was molecular. And
I don't think you want to tell them that.
No. And I was staring at the ceiling, just laying there. And all of a sudden I could feel my body. I wasn't in the body. And I was like, oh my gosh. And then it started to click. This is what happened. And it all started to connect. And in New Zealand, this long ago, I don't know if this is still how they do things, but they come in and they rotate and check on you, and the psychologists and psychiatrists ask you questions like, are you hearing and seeing things you shouldn't be? Which is hysterical to me. And this was the first time I had to trust this psychic, intuitive thing that had exploded inside of me, which is our normal true nature. It just awakened all of that. All of the senses of psychic mediumship, intuitiveness were wide awake. And just like you're sitting in front of me now, Peggy, there was an energy sitting on my cot, and she looked at me, and it was all telepathic, and I could hear her, and I just knew she was my birth guide, Gabrielle. And it was the first time I had to trust her. And she said, don't tell them, they'll lock you up. You have to trust us. And there was just this knowingness in my heart that that was purer than anything I'd ever experienced in 3D, to trust it. And yet, beside that, the thoughts were starting to come back. The doubting Thomas was saying, but what if you've damaged your brain? And now there's a dialogue going on. Remember, we were talking about thoughts? Now there's a dialogue of this internal knowingness, which is our God presence, awareness, whatever you call it, and this human consciousness that wants to collaborate and have conversation. That's just a computer program saying, doubting Thomas thinks you should be speculative and be concerned that you've damaged your brain. But the knowingness and the unconditional love was way more powerful than that doubting Thomas, so it would just fade away. I would hear it, see it like an ad on TV, but it would just fade away because I wasn't giving it any energy. This started to grow and expand and trust, and more of that began to happen. I had so many experiences in the hospital. I had what I call angelic experiences. I'll share one of them. I had 3 very profound ones. On my extended NDE, which is very long, I go into detail on all of them, but this first one was really the most impactful. As I was laying in the cot in the hospital, I heard a lot of disruption and stirring in the lobby area. And the curtain was open enough for me to peer out because they were watching me. So I was looking out, curious about what was going on, and just in my heart of pure unconditional love, I was beaming all this love throughout the whole lobby of the ER. It just couldn't not exude out of my body. Since I couldn't tell anyone and no one was really listening to me, I just laid there, not recognizing what I was doing, now knowing I was sending Reiki and love to everyone. And I saw this man come in, and he looked very upset and angry. And he was talking to the nurse, and he had a woman with him in a wheelchair, and she was floppy. And I could tell whether she was on medication or drugs or alcohol. I could tell she wasn't sane in her mind because she was on something. She was like slipping down in the wheelchair, and the man seemed very angry. I couldn't quite hear what he was saying, but the nurse and him were very much going at it. And they weren't paying attention to her. And her and I locked eyes. Here's this loopy being who can hardly sit up in the chair. And when we locked eyes, her body sat up erect. She stood up. She was still a little wobbly, and she wobbled over to my cot. And they didn't see any of this because they were in the middle of this altercation. And she flopped on my cot, and her eyes and my eyes were like this. And she said, I see you. And I didn't know still yet what that meant, but I felt it. And I just knew it was the other side communicating to me through these eyes, the God presence that we all are, the oneness that we are. Her human element was bringing that forward to remind me to remember, breathe and don't resist. That's your only role here. We're watching you. We see you. We're right here. And those experiences continue to this day. They continue throughout my hospital stay. I had 3 very profound angelic visits in the hospital. I was there overnight. They put me in the infectious disease ward. That was the only place that had a bed. I didn't know that when they wheeled me up there. I had a really crazy night. Again, in my extended NDE, I share that. But the reason it's profound to me was all of us NDEers that share this way, and Peggy, your heart and your blessed soul for bringing this channel to bring this to people. We come back with these messages not to be special, not to be unique, not to seem to be some hierarchical change from you. Not at all. Not at all. We come
And
back.
suicide's the hardest thing to talk about.
It is not easy to get on a channel and tell everyone you've just killed yourself. And yet you've come back, this bliss, this love, this euphoria. You know, my life for weeks after this, I had to learn how to drive this psychic body that I didn't know how to adapt to. I was seeing what felt like demons and scary things, and I realized that was fear, that was the thoughts. And as the center of awareness and godliness that I am settled more into the body, those absorbed and back into the heart too, I recognized these were angelic godliness beings, and I didn't see them as scary demons and scary things. The thoughts that we seem to have are all part of this global consciousness. They belong to no one. And as they're absorbed back to the center of love that we are, they too are transmuted. This is what the masters speak about. Heaven is here on earth, but we must find it within ourselves. It's always here. We lose it through conditioning. It's not about learning something, it's unraveling and letting all of this be unlearned so that we can be back to our true divine nature, which is pure unconditional love. And for weeks after this, learning how to redefine life, I went back to the life, remember, that I killed myself to escape. Nothing changed. The same partner, the same things, the same fears, the same, all of that was going on. There just wasn't a believing or connecting to them in the same way. I was forever shifted. So, ironically or not, for weeks after this, I would have papers on the wall and these downloads just kept coming. And I was just like a crazy person writing all this stuff on the wall. And my partner, I would hear him go into the bedroom, the office, and call his sister back here in the States, who was a psychologist, and say, if what she was saying didn't make so much damn sense, I'd take her back to the hospital. But everything she's relayed, as far as her experience and the downloads, makes
A
few more minutes. Why they wanting to do it?
Yeah.
Okay, we're about done.
Okay.
Sorry.
You're fine, made absolute sense. And so, you know, here is this guy who's living with me thinking, should I lock her back up? I just said, I can't. I want to follow what she's sharing. I want to understand more. Fast forward now from 2008. This is the work I do now, just like Peggy, just like any of us. We come forward with our hearts. We lead with love. We're about expansion. We're about gifting people with this fragment of what seemed to have happened, but we don't have to die have this, you guys, and we definitely do not have to kill ourselves to get there. This is an inner job. It's within you. Your heart center has everything you need. Our only role is to breathe and not resist. Frustrates people when I say there's no free will and that we have a soul plan. It frustrates people. But if you can get past that through not hearing it from the mind, but hearing it from your heart, and recognize God, which we are a part of, is so loving, it only wants experience and love with and for you, life begins to be seen as happening for us and not to us. That's the work we bring forward. That's us each being a light ambassador and stepping into this in a new way, with a new way of being, offering that to others. I know you do it, Peggy, too. Going to places and just sending this love that just wants to permeate every cell of our bodies. It just can't be in this tin can. It wants to expand. It wants to create a net of love and send this out. I'm imbuing it in this video right now, just as Peggy is. We call it Shakti Put. This love is coming through these words, which aren't mine. They're God, which you are a part of. And when you forget that, if you live the linear life, it gets very heavy and it feels like it's happening to us. But if you take one kernel of hope, one mustard seed of faith from this that I'm sharing today, it's this. You are unconditional, boundless love. You are God's presence in a physical form. You're here just to create and recreate love. Express it in every avenue. The smile you give the stranger in the parking lot, that's you with God. You with you with you. The reason we look into each other's eyes sometimes and it makes us cry, you're seeing yourself. You're seeing your wholeness. You're seeing your unity of all of this. More you experience that, and the less you go into the duality and the rightness and the wrongness, you meet, as Rumi says, in that place in the middle, that place where we're pure unconditional love. That which you seek is seeking you. It always has been. It's always been right here. It's been my honor and pleasure to be here with you guys today. I am so grateful to you, Peggy, for this channel and everything that you bring forward. I just have nothing but love for you and what you're doing here. And I hope all your followers really get what you're bringing forward in this channel.
I want a bumper sticker that says what you said, that heaven is here on earth, but we must find it within ourselves.
Yes. Yes.
And you're not going to find it within yourself when you're listening to what you were listening to and what I had when I was suicidal years ago, is that voice that says, what you're about to do is okay. In fact, it's great. Like you're just going home. It's going to be wonderful. Like this is a good idea. It's like those lies. We can be told those lies, and they can sound angelic even.
Yes.
But they're lies. And it's so hard sometimes to know what's the right thing to do when you're in those states.
I ask now, and I know you do too, is this thought worth having? The heart will always tell you yes or no. Your body is your true north. It's your GPS. Your heart knows. Your heart knows that's not a true thought. Meet it with love. It's not here to harm you. It's just background noise. Don't resist the thoughts. Don't try to push them away. They're only asking you to bring them back into the heart. That's what we call enlightenment. Enlightenment is an opportunity in every moment to enlighten this thought. You just discovered what enlightenment is. Every thought is only showing up to be enlightened. It wants the same thing the loving thoughts wants, to be invited back into the heart where it's transmuted and it no longer bothers you. It lets go.
And I appreciate you coming. I wish we could talk for hours, but I have internet companies saying we need to fix your internet right now. So, and you've been like kind of freezing, but I never lost you. So that's good. So I hope people look over the poor internet is on my end, because they're out here ready to fix it. So.
Well, I need you to get it fixed because you need.
Yeah, and I've got somebody in 45 minutes, so I hope they can fix it quick.
Okay. Much love to you and your audience, and thanks for having me on. I really appreciate you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.